Welcome, friend, to another journey together. Tonight, we will uncover ancient teachings and subtle insights that illuminate the path to profound inner quiet and deep restorative peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. I'm going to share a curated collection of powerful Zen and Buddhist tales, sharing long-guarded secrets to mental clarity and emotional serenity. Each story carries a transformative teaching, capable of shifting your relationship with the whirlwind of stress, the sting of anger, the endless loops of thought, and the ceaseless drive for more. These are far from ordinary sleep stories. They are meticulously preserved teachings from awakened masters, embodying a truth most of us have lost sight of. That authentic peace emerges not from altering external conditions, but from transforming our perception of them. As the great Zen master Dogen once advised, to study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. Through the course of our listening, you will uncover precisely how these timeless truths can reshape your very being. As we journey through these remarkable accounts, you will feel a remarkable shift begin to unfold. The clenching hold of anxiety will gently release. The incessant hum of your thoughts will soften into silence. You'll find yourself naturally settling into a state of deep understanding and tranquil repose. So, sink in deeply now. Allow your body to fully settle into whatever supports you. Take one deliberate breath with me, and as you release it, know that you are about to receive wisdom that has been patiently awaiting your discovery since the dawn of time. Let us explore a story about courage in the face of uncertainty. A young monk was traveling through the mountains to reach a remote monastery, his simple robes providing little protection against the crisp mountain air. As he walked the winding path, breathing in the thin air and listening to the whisper of wind through pine trees, he felt a deep sense of purpose guiding his steps toward the ancient place of learning he sought. When he crested a ridge, his heart sank. Before him stretched a deep gorge, its rocky walls disappearing into misty depths below. A bridge had once spanned this chasm, but time and weather had claimed most of its wooden planks, leaving only a few precarious boards stretching across the void. The remaining structure swayed gently in the mountain breeze, looking barely substantial enough to support a bird, much less a person. Other travelers had gathered at the edge, their faces etched with concern and frustration. Some pointed at the gaps between planks, calculating whether a running jump might carry them across. Others debated turning back to find another route, though that would mean days of additional travel through difficult terrain. The conversations grew heated as daylight began to fade and the urgency of crossing intensified. The young monk approached quietly, studying not the bridge, but the faces of those assembled. He saw their fear, their calculations, their mental rehearsals of disaster. Without joining their discussions or announcing his intentions, he simply stepped onto the first plank. The wood creaked under his weight, but held firm. Each step became a meditation. He placed his foot carefully on the center of each board, feeling its stability before transferring his full weight. His gaze remained fixed not on the swirling river far below or the remaining distance ahead, but on the single plank directly in front of his foot. One step, one breath, one moment of complete presence with what was actually before him. The other travelers fell silent, watching in amazement as the monk moved with deliberate grace across the precarious span. He did not rush, driven by fear of falling. He did not hesitate, paralyzed by the magnitude of the crossing. He simply continued, step by careful step, his attention fully absorbed in the immediate reality of each plank. When he reached the other side, he turned back to the astonished onlookers, his face serene and compassionate. "The bridge is not broken," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the gorge. "Only incomplete. One must still cross what is presented." With a gentle bow, he continued on his way toward the monastery, leaving the others to ponder his words and their own hesitation. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, if you are facing in the right direction, all you need to do is keep walking. This ancient teaching illuminates a profound truth about how we navigate uncertainty and limitation in our lives. The monk understood that perfection of conditions is not a prerequisite for moving forward. Life constantly presents us with incomplete bridges, situations that are less than ideal, but still possible when approached with presence and courage. Why do we so often wait for complete bridges before we're willing to cross? Zen Buddhism points to our mind's tendency toward what might be called perfect scenario syndrome. We become fixated on having all conditions aligned before taking action, waiting for complete certainty before moving forward. This mental habit keeps us trapped on the safe side of our own growth and potential. The deeper teaching here shows us that courage is not the absence of fear, but presence with what is actually before us. The other travelers saw only what was missing from the bridge. The monk saw what was present. This shift in perception changes everything. Instead of being paralyzed by gaps and imperfections, we can work skillfully with the resources and opportunities that are available. Consider how often throughout your day you encounter incomplete bridges, the work project that doesn't have all the information you'd like, the relationship conversation you've been avoiding because you don't know exactly what to say, the creative endeavor you haven't started because conditions aren't perfect. These are all incomplete bridges calling for the monk's approach, complete presence with one step at a time. Zen Master Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This seemingly paradoxical statement captures the essence of working with incomplete bridges. We don't wait for perfection to engage with life fully. We bring our whole presence to imperfect situations and discover they are more passable than our fearful mind suggested. The young monk's practice of keeping his gaze on the plank directly in front of his foot offers profound guidance for modern life. How often do we stumble not because of actual obstacles, but because we're looking ahead to future difficulties or back to past failures instead of attending to the step immediately before us? The email we need to send today, the conversation we need to have this afternoon, the simple task that's been waiting for our attention. Buddhist teacher Jack Cornfield reminds us, most of our difficulties come from our inability to be present with what is, as it is. The incomplete bridge will always look impossible from a distance, but approached with mindful attention, one plank at a time, it becomes not just passable, but an opportunity for developing unshakable confidence in our ability to work with whatever life presents. Tonight, as you consider the incomplete bridges in your own life, can you identify the first plank that's actually in front of you? Perhaps it's making that phone call you've been postponing, having that difficult conversation, or taking the first step toward a goal that seems overwhelming when viewed in its entirety. The bridge is not broken, only incomplete. As the Buddha taught, a jug fills drop by drop. Every complete journey across life's challenges begins with the willingness to place one foot on the first plank that's available, trusting that presence and careful attention will carry us safely across what initially appeared impossible. Our next story reveals a profound truth about the nature of learning and spiritual receptivity. In a distant monastery known for its vast library and learned scholars, there lived an abbot renowned throughout the region for his deep understanding of Buddhist teachings. Students traveled from far and wide to sit at his feet and receive instruction in the Dharma. One autumn morning, a distinguished scholar arrived at the monastery gates. His reputation preceded him, for he had spent decades studying the sacred texts, memorizing countless sutras, and debating the finest points of Buddhist philosophy with masters across the land. His robes were fine, his bearing confident, and his knowledge seemingly limitless. The scholar was granted an audience with the humble abbot, who received him in a simple room overlooking the monastery garden. As they sat facing each other on worn cushions, the scholar immediately began to display his learning. For hours, he quoted from the Lotus Sutra, analyzed the deeper meanings of the Diamond Sutra, and offered sophisticated interpretations of the Buddha's teaching on the Four Noble Truths. His words flowed like a rushing river, each sentence carefully constructed to demonstrate his mastery of doctrine. He spoke of emptiness and form, of the interdependence of all phenomena, of the subtle distinctions between various schools of Buddhist thought. The abbot listened patiently, occasionally nodding, his weathered hands resting calmly in his lap. As the afternoon wore on, the scholar's discourse grew even more elaborate. He debated the finer points of meditation practice, analyzed the historical development of Buddhist philosophy, and compared the teachings of various masters with scholarly precision. He paused occasionally, expecting praise for his vast knowledge, waiting for the abbot to acknowledge his profound understanding. Finally, as the sun began to set and golden light filtered through the simple paper windows, the scholar paused, confident he had demonstrated his exceptional grasp of the Dharma. The abbot smiled gently and reached for a simple clay teacup sitting nearby. Without a word, he picked up a ceramic pitcher filled with cool water and began to pour. The water flowed steadily into the cup, filling it to the brim, but the abbot continued pouring. The water overflowed, spilling onto the low wooden table between them, then cascading to the floor below. Still the abbot poured, his expression serene and focused, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "Stop!" the scholar exclaimed, breaking from his scholarly composure. "The cup is full. No more will go in." The abbot set down the pitcher and looked directly into the scholar's eyes with infinite kindness. "Your mind," he said quietly, "is like this cup, so full of what you already know, there is no room for anything new. To truly understand, you must first empty your well." For the first time in many years, the scholar found himself completely silent, his racing thoughts suddenly still, truly listening to something beyond his own vast accumulation of knowledge. The Buddha once said, "Empty your boat of all the water that has collected in it, so it may travel lightly and swiftly." What emerges from this story is a fundamental teaching about the nature of genuine learning and spiritual growth. True wisdom requires not just the accumulation of knowledge, but the cultivation of what Zen calls beginner's mind, a quality of openness and receptivity that allows for fresh understanding. Why do we fill our cups so completely that nothing new can enter? Buddhist psychology identifies several patterns that create this spiritual impediment. First is what might be called knowledge pride, the subtle ego satisfaction that comes from accumulating information and displaying our understanding. When we become attached to being seen as knowledgeable, we unconsciously resist experiences that might challenge or expand our existing framework. Second is the mind's tendency toward closure. Once we think we understand something, we stop paying attention to it with fresh eyes. We've categorized it, filed it away, and moved on to the next topic. But the Buddha's teachings point to truths that cannot be fully grasped through intellectual analysis alone. They must be lived, experienced, and discovered anew in each moment. Third is our fear of not knowing. In a culture that highly values expertise and certainty, admitting ignorance feels threatening. Yet Zen practice reveals that don't know mind is actually a state of tremendous openness and potential. When we think we already know, we stop looking. When we acknowledge we don't know, we become deeply curious and attentive. Zen master Shunryu Suzuki taught, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." This points to the paradox of learning. The more certain we become about our understanding, the less available we are to deeper insights. The teacup must be emptied regularly to receive fresh water. Consider your own relationship to learning and growth. In what areas of your life might your cup be overflowing? Perhaps in your understanding of relationships, where past experiences have created rigid expectations about how people behave. Or in your work, where expertise might blind you to innovative approaches. Even in spiritual practice, where previous insights might prevent fresh discoveries. The practice of emptying our cup is not about dismissing everything we've learned, but about holding our knowledge lightly. Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron reminds us, the only reason we don't open our hearts and minds to other people is that they trigger confusion in us that we don't feel brave enough to deal with. Our full cups often protect us from the vulnerability of genuine not knowing. This emptying happens through what Zen calls don't know mind. When we approach familiar situations with genuine curiosity, when we listen to others without immediately categorizing their words through our existing beliefs, when we sit in meditation without trying to achieve some previously experienced state, these are all practices of emptying the cup. In conversations, this might mean truly listening instead of waiting for our turn to demonstrate our knowledge. In conflicts, it might mean staying genuinely curious about the other person's perspective rather than defending our position. In daily life, it might mean approaching routine activities with fresh attention, as if encountering them for the first time. Tonight, as you reflect on your day, can you identify moments when your cup was so full there was no room for new understanding? Perhaps in a conversation where you were thinking about your response instead of truly hearing what was being shared. Or in a challenging situation where your assumptions prevented you from seeing fresh possibilities. As the Buddha taught, it is better to travel well than to arrive. The journey of learning never ends when we maintain beginner's mind. By regularly emptying our cups, we ensure there's always room for the fresh water of wisdom that flows continuously around us, waiting for vessels open enough to receive it. Let us now turn to a tale about finding beauty within imperfection. In a mountain village renowned for its pottery, there lived a master craftsman whose glazes were so flawless that nobles and merchants traveled great distances to acquire his work. His pieces were prized throughout the region for their perfect symmetry their unblemished surfaces that caught light like still water, and their glazes that seemed to hold the very essence of sky and earth within their depths. The potter's workshop was a place of meticulous order. Every tool had its place. Every technique had been refined through decades of practice, and every piece that emerged from his kiln met the highest standards of technical excellence. His apprentices watched in reverence as he shaped clay with hands that seemed to know intuitively the perfect thickness for each wall, the ideal curve for each rim. One spring morning, the potter began work on what he envisioned as his masterpiece, a vase that would embody everything he had learned about form, proportion, and the mysterious alchemy of fire and clay. For days he worked, shaping and reshaping until the vessel achieved a grace that seemed almost alive. The form flowed like water frozen in motion, each curve leading naturally to the next, creating a harmony that spoke to something deep in the soul. When the time came for firing, he placed the vase carefully in the center of his kiln, surrounded by other pieces, but given the place of honor. He tended the fire with extraordinary care, adjusting the temperature with subtle precision, monitoring each stage of the firing process as if his life depended on it. Everything proceeded perfectly, but when he opened the kiln after the cooling period, his heart stopped. There, across the vase's otherwise flawless surface, ran a hairline crack, barely visible yet undeniably present. It traced a delicate path from the neck toward the base, like a whispered imperfection in an otherwise perfect song. His apprentices, seeing the master's expression of disappointment, quickly moved to remove the piece and add it to the pile of seconds that would be sold cheaply in the village market, or perhaps broken down and recycled into new clay. "No," the potter said quietly, his voice carrying an unexpected gentleness. "This one stays." To everyone's surprise, he carried the vase not to the storage room, but to his personal quarters, placing it on a special shelf among his most treasured possessions. For weeks afterward, visitors would often find him sitting quietly before the vase, studying it with an expression that seemed part contemplation, part wonder. One afternoon, a wealthy collector known throughout the region for his discerning eye and vast collection arrived at the workshop. He examined many pieces with professional appreciation, praising their technical excellence and artistic merit. But repeatedly, his attention returned to the flawed vase on the potter's personal shelf. Finally, unable to contain his curiosity, he pointed to it. "That piece," he said, his voice filled with genuine wonder, "is truly extraordinary. The crack, though certainly unintended, somehow emphasizes the strength and beauty of the form itself. It's like a lightning bolt revealing the mountain's core, or a river defining the landscape through which it flows. It speaks of resilience, of beauty that encompasses the unexpected. It whispers stories of the journey through fire." The potter smiled, understanding passing between them like a shared secret. He had already learned what the collector was just discovering, that true artistry wasn't found only in avoiding imperfections, but in recognizing how those imperfections could reveal deeper truths about the beauty and resilience inherent in all created things. As the Buddha observed, there is no lotus without mud. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that imperfection is not the enemy of beauty, but often its most profound teacher. The crack in the vase revealed something that perfect smoothness could never show: the tension and strength required to hold together under pressure, the story of transformation through fire, the delicate balance between fragility and endurance that defines all existence. Why do we struggle so intensely with our own cracks and imperfections? Buddhist teaching points to our deep conditioning around what constitutes value and worthiness. From early childhood, we learn to associate love and acceptance with meeting certain standards, with being good enough according to external measures. This creates what Zen calls perfectionist mind, a relentless internal critic that sees any deviation from an imagined ideal as failure. This perfectionist conditioning causes us to hide our cracks rather than recognize them as part of our unique beauty. We develop elaborate strategies to appear flawless, spending enormous energy maintaining facades of competence, happiness, or spiritual attainment. But these efforts often distance us from the very connections and authentic experiences we truly seek. The Japanese aesthetic principle of wabi-sabi teaches us to find beauty in impermanence, imperfection, and incompleteness. In this worldview, the crack in the potter's vase doesn't diminish its beauty, it completes it. It tells the story of its creation, reveals its humanity, and invites us to appreciate it not despite its flaw, but because of how that flaw contributes to its unique character. Consider your own relationship with your perceived imperfections. Perhaps it's the way your voice cracks when you're nervous, which actually makes others feel more at ease with their own vulnerability. Or the scar that tells the story of an adventure or accident that shaped who you became. These apparent flaws often become the very qualities that others find most endearing and authentic about us. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck taught, "We are all perfect as we are, and we could all use a little improvement." This paradox captures the essence of working skillfully with our imperfections. We don't need to be fixed or completed to be worthy of love and acceptance. Yet this acceptance doesn't prevent us from growing and learning. The crack also represents resilience, the ability to continue functioning and even thriving despite damage or stress. When we try to appear perfect, we often become brittle, afraid that any challenge will shatter our carefully constructed image. But when we acknowledge our cracks openly, we develop a different kind of strength, the flexibility to bend without breaking, the authenticity that comes from self-acceptance. In relationships, showing our cracks often deepens connection rather than weakening it. When we let others see our struggles, our uncertainties, our learning edges, we invite them to be equally authentic. The cracks become doorways for genuine intimacy and mutual support. Buddhist practice encourages us to investigate our aversion to imperfection with gentle curiosity. What stories do we tell ourselves about what we need to be in order to be acceptable? How much energy do we spend trying to hide our natural human limitations? What might become possible if we brought the potter's appreciative awareness to our own beautiful cracks? Tonight, as you notice the places where you feel imperfect or flawed, can you look at them with the collector's discerning eye? Perhaps that tendency toward anxiety reveals your deep sensitivity to others' needs. Maybe that quick temper shows your passionate commitment to fairness. These cracks don't diminish your worth. They tell the story of your unique journey through the fires of experience. As the Buddha taught, better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. Sometimes that one word is simply enough, the recognition that we are already complete, cracks and all, already worthy of love, already beautiful in our imperfect humanity. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the futility of constant struggle against the natural order. In a mountain monastery famous for its exquisitely maintained gardens, there lived a monk whose devotion to beauty and order was legendary. Every morning before dawn, he would begin his work among the carefully tended beds of flowers and vegetables, the precisely raked gravel paths, and the meticulously pruned trees that had been shaped by generations of careful hands. His garden was a marvel of harmony and balance. Each plant flourished in its designated place. Every pathway was swept clean of the smallest debris, and the patterns he raked into the gravel seemed to capture the very essence of flowing water and wind. Visitors often commented that walking through his garden felt like entering a realm where chaos had never existed, where everything existed in perfect accordance with human intention. One morning in early spring, as the monk completed his dawn meditation and prepared to begin his daily gardening routine, he discovered something that stopped him in his tracks. In the center of the main courtyard, breaking through the carefully maintained expanse of raked gravel, a small green shoot had emerged overnight. It was clearly a weed, not one of the plants he had carefully selected and placed, but something wild and uninvited. The monk frowned, disturbed by this disruption to his perfect order. He knelt down and carefully pulled the weed, roots and all, then smoothed the gravel back into its pristine patterns. But the next morning, the weed had returned, emerging in the exact same spot as if it had never been disturbed. Day after day, the same ritual repeated. The monk would remove the weed with increasing thoroughness, digging deeper to ensure he had captured every trace of root, treating the soil to prevent regrowth, even replacing the gravel entirely. But each morning brought the same small green rebellion against his efforts. The monk tried every technique he knew. He poured boiling water on the spot. He covered it with stones. He planted other vegetation nearby to crowd out the unwanted growth. Nothing worked. The weed returned with what seemed like increasing vitality, as if each attempt to destroy it only strengthened its determination to exist. As weeks passed, the monk found himself thinking about this single weed constantly. His attention, once distributed evenly across the entire garden, became fixated on this one small imperfection. He would wake in the night wondering if it had emerged again. His meditation became agitated as he planned new strategies for its elimination. Finally, in frustration and confusion, he sought counsel from the monastery's abbot. The elder monk listened patiently to the gardener's tale of struggle, nodding with understanding and gentle amusement. When the story was complete, the abbot smiled. "Perhaps," he suggested with characteristic gentleness, "the weed is not an enemy to be conquered, but a teacher to be welcomed. Consider what it demonstrates: resilience, an unwavering commitment to life, and the ultimate futility of fighting against the fundamental nature of existence. Instead of battling this small teacher, why not tend to the rest of your garden and let the weed remind you that even in our most carefully ordered lives, there is always something wild and untamed." From that day forward, the monk's relationship with his garden transformed completely. He continued to tend his plants with love and attention, but he stopped fighting the persistent weed. Instead, he began to observe its cycle of growth with curiosity and even appreciation. In doing so, he discovered a strange and unexpected peace, the relief that comes from surrendering an unwinnable battle. Buddha's wisdom tells us, pain is certain, suffering is optional. This ancient teaching shows us that the gardener's suffering came not from the weed itself, but from his resistance to its existence. The weed simply was, growing according to its nature, responding to sunlight and moisture, following the irresistible impulse toward life that moves through all things. The suffering arose from the monk's insistence that reality should be different than it was. Why do we exhaust ourselves fighting unwinnable battles? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning around control and our resistance to accepting what is beyond our influence. The mind creates an illusion that we can manage all aspects of our experience if we just try hard enough, plan carefully enough, or fight persistently enough. This leads to what might be called gardener's syndrome, the belief that life should conform to our careful designs. But existence includes forces beyond our control. There will always be weeds in our carefully tended gardens, the difficult colleague who triggers our anger, the physical limitation that constrains our plans, the emotional pattern that resurfaces despite our efforts to overcome it. These persistent challenges are not signs of our failure, but invitations to develop a different relationship with what we cannot change. The deeper wisdom here reveals itself when we recognize that our energy is finite and precious. Every moment spent fighting unchangeable circumstances is energy not available for nurturing what can actually grow and flourish under our care. The monk could have channeled his frustrated efforts toward cultivating more beauty in other parts of the garden, but his fixation on the one weed prevented him from seeing these possibilities. Consider the persistent weeds in your own life. Perhaps it's a family member whose behavior consistently triggers your frustration, despite your repeated efforts to change them. Or a physical condition that requires ongoing management rather than cure. Maybe it's an aspect of your personality that you've tried for years to eliminate, but that keeps returning in various forms. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." This apparent contradiction points to the middle way between resignation and futile struggle. We continue to tend our gardens with care and intention, but we hold our efforts lightly, recognizing that perfect control is neither possible nor necessary for a meaningful life. The abbot's suggestion to let the weed remind you transforms the persistent problem from an enemy into a teacher. That difficult person becomes a mirror reflecting our attachment to having things our way. The recurring challenge becomes a practice ground for developing patience and acceptance. The limitation becomes a boundary that helps us appreciate what is actually within our influence. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning all effort to create positive change. The monk continued to tend his garden with dedication and skill, but he stopped exhausting himself in futile battles and found peace in accepting the mixture of order and wildness that characterizes all of life. Buddhist practice includes what's called skillful effort, learning to distinguish between the changes we can influence and those we cannot. This discernment prevents us from wasting precious energy on unwinnable fights, while ensuring we don't abandon responsibility for what is genuinely within our power to affect. Tonight, as you consider the persistent weeds in your own carefully tended life, can you identify which battles might be consuming energy that could be better directed elsewhere? What if you stopped fighting that one recurring challenge and instead let it teach you about resilience, acceptance, and the wild nature that exists alongside all human attempts at perfect order? As the Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. Sometimes the most radical act is not to fight our persistent weeds, but to let them grow while we tend to the rest of our garden with renewed appreciation and joy. Let us continue on our journey with a tale about the true nature of fulfillment and the difference between seeking and finding. By a gently flowing river that wound through hills covered in bamboo and willow trees, there lived an old fisherman known throughout the valley for his wisdom and serenity. Every morning, as the mist rose from the water and the first light touched the mountains, he would carry his simple bamboo rod to the same quiet spot along the riverbank. The old man had fished these waters for more years than anyone could remember. His weathered hands moved with practiced grace as he prepared his line, selected his bait, and cast into the slow-moving current. But those who observed him closely noticed something unusual about his fishing practice. He rarely seemed to catch anything, yet his contentment appeared deeper than that of fishermen who returned home with heavy baskets. One bright morning, a young fisherman who had heard stories about the old master decided to seek him out. This younger man was ambitious and skilled, known for his ability to read the water and locate the best fishing spots. He had studied the feeding patterns of different fish, invested in the finest equipment, and approached fishing with the intensity of someone determined to succeed. The young fisherman found the old man sitting peacefully by the water, his line cast into a section of river that appeared to hold no particular promise. For hours, the younger man watched, growing increasingly puzzled. The old master's technique seemed adequate, but not exceptional. His equipment was simple, almost primitive by modern standards. Most confusing of all, fish occasionally approached his bait, but he seemed almost indifferent to whether they took it or not. As the sun climbed higher and still the old man had caught nothing, the young fisherman could contain his curiosity no longer. Approaching respectfully, he bowed and said, "Honored elder, I have watched you for many hours. Your catches appear to be few, yet you fish with such dedication and seem so peaceful. I have come seeking to learn from your wisdom. What is the secret of your approach?" The old fisherman's eyes twinkled with gentle amusement as he gestured for the young man to sit beside him on the smooth rocks that lined the shore. For a long moment, they sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the soft gurgle of water over stones and the distant call of birds in the trees. "My young friend," the old man finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority of deep experience. "You ask about my secret, but perhaps you are looking in the wrong direction. My secret lies not in the fish I catch, but in the net I do not see." The young fisherman looked confused, glancing around for some hidden net or equipment he had missed. The old man smiled and continued, "Every cast, every moment of waiting, every breath taken beside this flowing water is an act of complete presence. The fish are merely a bonus, a gift when they choose to offer themselves. The true catch is the quiet mind, the rhythm of the water moving through my awareness, and the understanding that even when my basket remains empty, something profound is always being received." He paused, watching as his line drifted gently downstream. "You see, I have learned that there are two kinds of fishing. One seeks to capture something outside ourselves to fill an inner emptiness. The other discovers that the fullness we seek has been present all along, waiting not to be caught, but to be recognized." The young fisherman sat in thoughtful silence, beginning to understand that he had come seeking technical knowledge, but was receiving something far more valuable, a completely different understanding of what it means to find what we're truly looking for. The Buddha once said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." This tale unveils a profound truth about the nature of seeking and fulfillment. The old fisherman had discovered that what we're ultimately looking for is not outside ourselves, waiting to be captured, but is the very awareness with which we approach our seeking. Why do we exhaust ourselves chasing external achievements and acquisitions when deeper satisfaction remains elusive? Buddhist psychology explains that we've been conditioned to believe that happiness comes from getting something we don't currently have. This creates what Zen calls hungry ghost mind, a state of constant craving that can never be satisfied because it's based on a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of contentment. The young fisherman represents our usual approach to life, goal-oriented, results-focused, always measuring success by what we manage to capture or achieve. While this approach can certainly bring practical results, it often leaves us feeling empty despite our accomplishments. We catch the fish, but miss the deeper nourishment available in the process itself. The invisible net the old fisherman speaks of represents the field of awareness that surrounds and permeates every experience. When we learn to fish with this net, we discover that fulfillment is not dependent on outcomes, but arises from the quality of presence we bring to whatever we're doing. The rhythm of casting becomes a meditation. The waiting becomes an opportunity for stillness. Even the fish that escape become teachers about non-attachment. Consider your own relationship with seeking and achieving. How often do you postpone contentment until you reach the next goal, acquire the next possession, or solve the next problem? This pattern keeps us perpetually in the future, missing the richness available in the present moment. The old fisherman had learned to find fulfillment in the process rather than the product. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh teaches, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." This points to the same understanding the fisherman embodies. We don't fish in order to be happy when we catch something. We fish happily, allowing the activity itself to be complete regardless of external results. This doesn't mean abandoning all goals or efforts. The old man still cast his line, still used proper technique, still hoped for fish, but he held these activities lightly, without the desperate attachment that turns every pursuit into a source of suffering. He had learned what Buddhist teaching calls skillful action, engaging fully while remaining unattached to specific outcomes. The invisible net also represents the interconnected web of relationships and experiences that supports us at every moment. The warmth of sunlight, the sound of flowing water, the breath moving through our body, the very capacity for awareness itself. These gifts are constantly being offered, but we miss them when we're fixated on catching something else. Buddhist practice cultivates this recognition through mindfulness meditation. As we learn to pay attention to present moment experience without constantly trying to change or improve it, we discover the abundance that's always available. The breath becomes as interesting as any external achievement. The simple act of sitting becomes as fulfilling as any acquisition. This understanding transforms our relationship with work, relationships, and all our daily activities. Instead of rushing through experiences to get to some imagined better future, we learn to inhabit them fully. The commute becomes an opportunity for awareness rather than just time to endure. The difficult conversation becomes a chance to practice presence rather than just an obstacle to overcome. Tonight, as you reflect on your own seeking and striving, can you identify the invisible net that's always available to you? Perhaps it's the steady rhythm of your breathing, the feeling of being supported by the chair or bed beneath you, or simply the miracle of consciousness itself witnessing this moment. These gifts require no effort to receive, no achievement to deserve. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The old fisherman had discovered this inner peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. By learning to fish with presence rather than desperation, with gratitude rather than grasping, he had found the true catch that satisfies completely, the recognition that we already have everything we need for deep contentment. Let us keep going on our journey. The following story reveals the difference between helping and holding on. This is the lesson of the two monks and the woman at the river. Two monks were traveling together along a mountain path, making their way to a distant monastery where they planned to continue their studies. Both were dedicated practitioners who had taken strict vows as part of their spiritual training, including a vow to avoid all physical contact with women. This wasn't born from disrespect, but from their understanding that such discipline helped maintain focus on their spiritual development. As they approached a swollen river where the usual bridge had been damaged by recent storms, they encountered a young woman standing uncertainly at the water's edge. The current was strong and treacherous, filled with debris from the mountain runoff, and she was clearly afraid to attempt crossing alone. "Please, honored monks," she called to them, "could one of you help me cross this dangerous water? I'm not strong enough to make it safely on my own." One of the monks immediately tensed, his mind racing through their monastic rules and the potential complications of this situation. Physical contact with women was explicitly forbidden, and he began formulating explanations for why they couldn't help, perhaps suggestions for alternative solutions that wouldn't require breaking their vows. The other monk, however, took one look at the woman's predicament and the genuine danger she faced, and made a different choice. Without hesitation or lengthy deliberation, he walked to her side and gently lifted her onto his shoulders. He carried her carefully across the treacherous current, ensuring her safety with each step, and set her down gently on the far bank. "Thank you so much," she said gratefully, bowing to both monks before continuing on her way. The two monks resumed their journey, but the atmosphere between them had changed dramatically. The first monk walked in increasingly agitated silence, his mind churning with thoughts about what he had witnessed. As the hours passed, his internal tension grew until finally he could no longer contain his distress. "Brother," he burst out, unable to hold his silence any longer, "I cannot understand your behavior back at the river. Our spiritual training explicitly teaches us to avoid any physical contact with women. Yet you picked that woman up onto your shoulders and carried her across the water. How could you so blatantly violate our sacred vows?" His companion looked at him with gentle surprise and responded with perfect simplicity. "Brother, I set her down on the other side of the river hours ago, but you are still carrying her." Buddha's wisdom teaches us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This tale unveils the profound difference between compassionate action and mental attachment, between responding to present needs and carrying past events. Why do we often carry situations long after they've ended, replaying scenarios and nursing grievances that only exist in our own minds? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our inability to release experiences once they've passed. The first monk's agitation demonstrates how rigid adherence to rules can sometimes conflict with the compassionate spirit that inspired those rules originally. His fellow monk saw a person in danger, and responded with immediate kindness, then completely released the incident. But the first monk carried the event for hours, letting it grow heavier with each step. Consider your own tendency to replay past conversations, nurse old grievances, or mentally rehearse scenarios that have already ended. How much of your mental energy goes toward carrying situations that exist now only in memory? The woman crossed the river in minutes, but the monk carried her for hours through his own thoughts. This teaching applies to far more than dramatic violations of rules. We carry harsh words someone spoke years ago, mistakes we made decades past, embarrassing moments that no one else even remembers. Meanwhile, the present moment, rich with possibility and actual experience, goes unnoticed because we're too busy carrying ghosts from the past. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between appropriate action and unnecessary attachment. The second monk helped when help was needed, then moved on completely. He didn't dwell on whether he'd made the right choice, worry about others' opinions, or replay the incident endlessly in his mind. Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The river crossing was impermanent. It began, served its purpose, and ended. Only the first monk's attachment to the event gave it ongoing existence in the form of mental suffering. The Buddha said, "Let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax, right now, and rest." This teaching points directly to the freedom available when we stop carrying experiences beyond their natural lifespan. Look deeply at what you might be carrying unnecessarily. Old resentments, past failures, conversations that upset you, decisions you regret. All of these exist now only because you continue to pick them up and carry them. What would it feel like to set them down? The irony is profound. The monk who actually broke the rule experienced no suffering from it, while the monk who maintained perfect rule observance created hours of agitation for himself. This reveals that suffering often comes not from our actions, but from our thoughts about our actions. Tonight, as you notice your mind returning to past events, old grievances, or situations that have already ended, can you remember the wise monk's example? Can you practice setting down whatever you've been carrying unnecessarily, discovering the lightness that comes from traveling through life without the burden of yesterday's experiences? As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the end, only three things matter: how well we have lived, how well we have loved, how well we have learned to let go. True spiritual practice isn't about perfect rule following, but about responding appropriately to what's actually present, then releasing it completely to make space for whatever comes next. Our next story reveals a profound teaching about the nature of emptiness and the surprising places where we discover truth. This is the story of grasping what cannot be held. In a quiet monastery garden where cherry blossoms drifted gently on the morning breeze, Master Sekyo sat with one of his most earnest students. The young monk had been studying Buddhist philosophy for several years, filling his mind with concepts about the nature of reality, the illusion of the self, and the teaching of emptiness that seems so central to the Buddha's wisdom. He could recite passages about shunyata, discuss the philosophical implications of non-being, and engage in lengthy debates about the relationship between form and void. But for all his intellectual understanding, something felt missing. The words remained just words, concepts floating in his mind without the direct experience that would make them real. He approached his teacher that morning with a question that had been troubling him for months. "Master," the young monk said, bowing respectfully. I have studied the teaching of emptiness extensively. I understand that all phenomena arise and pass away, that nothing has permanent, independent existence. But I feel like I'm only grasping concepts. Can you help me get hold of emptiness itself? Sekio looked at his student with knowing eyes. He had seen this struggle many times before, the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization, the frustration of trying to grasp with the mind what can only be known through experience. Show me how you would get hold of emptiness, the master said simply. The monk thought for a moment, then cupped his hands in the air as if he were trying to capture something invisible. He held his hands carefully as though cradling a soap bubble that might burst at any moment. His face was earnest and concentrated, his entire being focused on this attempt to demonstrate his understanding of a teaching about the very nature of nothingness. There, he said, holding his cupped hands very still. I'm trying to hold emptiness itself. Sekio looked at the student's empty hands and shook his head gently. That's not very good, he said with a slight smile. You haven't got anything in there at all. You're just holding air and calling it something special. The monk's face fell. He had been so certain that his gesture captured something meaningful about the teaching. Well, master, he said, his voice tinged with disappointment and confusion. Please show me a better way. How does one truly get hold of emptiness? Without warning, Master Sekio reached out and grabbed the monk's nose, giving it a sharp, firm yank. Ouch! The monk yelled, his hands flying to his face, his eyes watering from the sudden, unexpected pain. Master, that hurt me! Sekio released his grip and smiled broadly. Now that, he said with satisfaction, is how you get hold of emptiness. The monk stood there, rubbing his nose, completely bewildered. His nose throbbed with very real, very unempty pain. How could this physical sensation, this undeniable presence of discomfort, have anything to do with emptiness? It seemed like the opposite of everything he had been studying. But as the initial shock wore off, something began to shift in his understanding. The pain in his nose was absolutely real, yet it was also completely impermanent, already beginning to fade. It had arisen from nowhere, would disappear completely, and left no permanent mark on reality. It was both utterly present and completely insubstantial. More importantly, in the moment of that sharp sensation, all his conceptual thinking about emptiness had vanished entirely. There had been no philosophical analysis, no abstract understanding, just direct, immediate experience. The gap between the one experiencing and the thing experienced had dissolved in the simple reality of ouch. As the Buddha taught, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Here we discover that emptiness is not the absence of experience, but the very nature of all experience. Everything arises, exists for a moment, and passes away, leaving no permanent trace while being completely real in its moment of appearing. Why do we struggle so hard to understand emptiness conceptually when it's the very fabric of every moment? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of trying to grasp reality with our thinking minds rather than experiencing it directly. We turn the most immediate truths into abstract philosophies, then wonder why they feel distant and theoretical. The monk's mistake was common and understandable. He was trying to hold emptiness as if it were a thing, an object that could be captured and possessed. But emptiness isn't an object. It's the very condition that allows all objects to appear and disappear. It's not something we can grasp. It's what makes grasping possible. Consider your own experience right now. The thoughts arising in your mind. Where do they come from? Where do they go when they fade? The sensations in your body, the sounds around you, even your sense of being someone who is reading these words, all of it is appearing and disappearing in the space of awareness like clouds in an empty sky. This emptiness isn't blank nothingness. It's alive, responsive, creative, the very capacity for experience itself. When Sekio yanked his student's nose, he wasn't demonstrating the absence of sensation, but the miraculous way sensation appears from nowhere, exists vividly, and dissolves back into nowhere, all within the spacious emptiness of awareness. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The monk was rejecting his direct experience in favor of his concepts about experience. The master's intervention brought him back to the immediacy of seeing, feeling, and knowing without the filter of philosophical analysis. In our daily lives, we constantly encounter this same teaching. The anger that seems so solid and permanent when we're caught in it. Where does it go when it naturally subsides? The worry that feels so important and real. What is its actual substance when we look closely? Even our sense of being a solid, separate self, isn't it actually more like a flowing process? A river that appears to be the same while constantly changing. The Buddha said, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This isn't a philosophical statement, but a direct pointing to what's happening right now. Everything we experience is empty, in the sense that it has no permanent, independent existence, yet it's all perfectly real as it appears. Tonight, as you notice thoughts, sensations, and experiences arising and passing in your awareness, can you sense the emptiness that Sekio was pointing to? Not as an abstract concept, but as the very space in which your life is unfolding. Can you feel how this emptiness is not separate from the fullness of your experience, but is its very nature? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The emptiness of all phenomena isn't something we need to achieve or understand. It's what we are, what everything is right now. We just need to stop trying to grasp it and let ourselves be grasped by it instead. As we continue our journey, let us now turn to a story about acceptance and the art of contentment. This is the shepherd's wisdom. Along a dusty mountain road where wildflowers dotted the hillsides, a weary traveler encountered a shepherd tending his flock. The morning sun climbed steadily higher, and clouds gathered on the horizon, creating an uncertain sky that could promise either gentle rain or scorching heat. The shepherd sat peacefully on a smooth boulder, watching his sheep graze contentedly among wild grasses. His face bore the calm expression of one who had spent countless seasons under open sky, learning lessons that only nature can teach. There was something in his demeanor, a quality of unshakable serenity that drew the traveler's attention. "Good morning, friend," the traveler called out, wiping sweat from his brow. "What kind of weather are we going to have today?" The shepherd looked up with eyes that held mountain stream clarity and smiled with genuine warmth. "The kind of weather I like," he replied simply, as if this were the most obvious answer in the world. The traveler paused, confused. He had expected a practical forecast that would help him plan his day. Instead, he received what seemed like circular logic, offering no useful information. "How do you know it will be the kind of weather you like?" the traveler pressed, his voice carrying frustration mixed with curiosity. The shepherd's smile deepened, and he gestured toward the vast sky above them, where clouds and clear patches moved in their eternal dance. "Having found out, sir, that I cannot always get what I like," he said, with the patience of one who had learned life's most essential lesson, "I have learned to always like what I get, so I am quite sure we will have the kind of weather I like." The traveler stood in silence, the profound simplicity of this wisdom settling into his understanding, like seeds finding fertile ground. Here was a man who had discovered something that all the weather predictions in the world could not provide: complete freedom from the anxiety of uncertainty. As the Buddha observed, attachment is the root of suffering. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true contentment comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from transforming our relationship to whatever circumstances arise. Why do we exhaust ourselves trying to arrange life according to our preferences, rather than learning to find peace within whatever life presents? The shepherd represents what Zen calls great acceptance, not passive resignation, but the profound wisdom that recognizes resistance to reality as the primary source of suffering. When we fight against what is, we create an internal war that drains our energy and blocks our capacity for contentment. When we learn to align ourselves with reality as it unfolds, we discover the tremendous peace that comes from swimming with the current rather than against it. Consider how much mental and emotional energy we spend each day resisting circumstances beyond our control. Traffic jams, weather that doesn't match our plans, people who don't behave as we think they should. Each resistance creates a small contraction in our awareness, a tiny rebellion against reality that accumulates into chronic dissatisfaction. The shepherd's approach doesn't mean becoming passive or ceasing to have preferences. We can still hope for sunny days while fully accepting rainy ones. We can work toward goals while finding peace when outcomes differ from expectations. The key lies in holding our preferences lightly rather than allowing them to determine our contentment. Zen Master Seng Tsan wrote, "The great way is not difficult for those who have no preferences." This doesn't suggest eliminating all desires, but rather not allowing those desires to become demands that reality must fulfill for us to be okay. Look deeply at your own patterns of resistance. How often do you find yourself arguing with reality, wishing circumstances were different, or believing you'll be content when things change? This tension is optional, not because you should suppress your desires, but because you can learn to hold them more skillfully. The Buddha taught that attachment doesn't mean caring deeply about things. It means making our inner peace conditional on external circumstances, arranging themselves according to our specifications. The shepherd cares about his flock and appreciates comfort, but his fundamental contentment doesn't depend on any particular outcome. Tonight, as you reflect on the day's experiences, both pleasant and challenging, can you find the shepherd's secret within your own awareness? What if contentment isn't waiting for better circumstances, but is available right now through a shift in perspective? As the Buddha taught, happiness does not depend on what you have or who you are. It solely relies on what you think. The shepherd discovered that when we stop demanding that life conform to our expectations, we find the freedom to enjoy life exactly as it presents itself. Now, let us explore a story about the patient path to wisdom and the paradox of urgent seeking. This is the teaching of the one-eyed student. In a peaceful valley surrounded by cherry trees, a young man had heard stories of a renowned Zen master whose students achieved profound realization through diligent practice. Filled with spiritual ambition and eager to transform his life, the young seeker traveled many days to reach the master's monastery, his mind burning with determination to attain enlightenment as quickly as possible. When he finally arrived, dusty from the road and bright with enthusiasm, he immediately sought an audience with the master. The old teacher received him in a simple room overlooking a garden, where monks moved slowly among vegetables and flowers, their movements unhurried and graceful. "Master," the young man said, bowing earnestly, "I have come to study Zen with complete dedication. I am willing to work harder than anyone has ever worked before. Tell me, if I apply myself with absolute diligence and unwavering effort, how long will it take for me to find Zen?" The master sat quietly for a long moment, watching the young man's eager face, noting the tension in his shoulders and the urgent energy that radiated from his posture. Finally, he replied thoughtfully, 10 years. The student's eyes widened with surprise. 10 years seemed like such a long time when enlightenment felt so urgent, so necessary for his happiness. Surely, with the right approach, the process could be accelerated. "But master," he said, leaning forward intently, "what if I work very, very hard and really apply myself to learn fast? What if I meditate longer than the other students, study more texts, practice more intensively? How long then?" The master considered this with the same careful attention, then replied calmly, "Well, 20 years. The young man's face showed his confusion and growing frustration. This made no sense at all. How could greater effort result in slower progress? Perhaps the master hadn't understood the depth of his commitment. "But master, I don't think you understand how serious I am about this," he said, his voice rising slightly with urgency. "What if I really, really work at it? What if I dedicate every waking moment to practice, sleep only when absolutely necessary, and push myself beyond all normal limits? Surely then I could achieve realization much faster. How long would it take then?" 30 years, the master replied without hesitation. By now, the student was completely bewildered and increasingly agitated. Nothing the master said made sense according to his understanding of how learning worked. In every other area of life, music, martial arts, scholarship, harder work produced faster results. Why should spiritual practice be different? "Master, I do not understand," he said, no longer able to hide his disappointment and confusion. "Each time that I say I will work harder, you say it will take me longer. This seems completely backwards. Why do you say that?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate, like a father explaining something important to a beloved child who was old enough to understand. "When you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye on the path," the master explained quietly. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual progress and the paradox of goal-oriented seeking. Why does intense goal fixation actually slow our spiritual development? Zen Buddhism reveals several ways that excessive focus on attainment creates obstacles to realization. First is the problem of divided attention. When part of our consciousness is constantly measuring progress toward an imagined destination, we cannot fully inhabit the present moment practices that actually cultivate awakening. Consider learning to play a musical instrument. If you spend half your practice time obsessing about when you'll be good enough to perform publicly, that energy isn't available for the careful attention to finger placement, rhythm, and tone that develops skill. The music emerges through complete absorption in the present moment relationship between musician and instrument. not through anxious projection toward future competence. Second is what Zen calls gaining mind, the subtle grasping that turns spiritual practice into a transaction. When we practice meditation to get enlightenment, study texts to accumulate wisdom, or cultivate compassion to become better people, we're approaching the path as consumers rather than participants. This gaining mind creates a fundamental split between who we think we are now and who we imagine we need to become. The Buddha said, "What you are looking for is where you are looking from." This profound teaching points to the very heart of the Master's lesson. Zen is not something we attain, but something we recognize. It's not a destination we reach, but the very awareness with which we walk the path. This ancient wisdom illuminates why urgent spiritual seeking often becomes self-defeating. When we're frantically pursuing enlightenment, we're operating from the assumption that our present experience is somehow inadequate or incomplete. But Zen teaches that the seeking mind itself is the very awareness we're seeking to find. Look deeply at your own experience of learning and growth. Haven't your most profound insights often come when you weren't actively trying to have insights? Perhaps while walking in nature, washing dishes, or simply sitting quietly without agenda. These moments of natural awareness reveal what the Master was pointing toward. That wisdom emerges when we stop dividing our attention between here and there, now and then. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." This teaching invites us to examine our relationship to spiritual practice itself. Are we practicing to become someone different, or are we practicing to recognize who we already are? Are we walking the path to get somewhere else, or are we discovering that the path itself is the destination? The student's error wasn't his desire for realization, but his assumption that it existed somewhere other than in his present moment experience. Each time he proposed working harder, he was actually moving further from the natural awareness that practice reveals. Like trying to catch your own shadow by running faster, the more urgently you chase it, the more it seems to flee. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called just sitting. Meditation without gaining mind, without agenda, without dividing attention between practice and goal. This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our dedication. Instead, we bring wholehearted attention to each moment of practice, allowing insights to emerge naturally rather than forcing them through willful effort. Consider how this teaching might apply to other areas of your life. Perhaps in relationships, where trying too hard to be loved often pushes others away, or in creative work, where forcing inspiration typically produces stilted results, while relaxed attention allows natural creativity to flow. Tonight, as you notice your mind racing toward imagined destinations, the person you want to become, the peace you want to find, the understanding you want to achieve, can you remember the Master's teaching? Can you gently return both eyes to the path, discovering that the journey itself contains everything you thought you were seeking at its end? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." By walking the path with undivided attention, we discover that what we thought lay at its end was present in every step. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about true spiritual power. This is the tale of the miracle of ordinary living. At Ryumon Temple, the renowned Zen master Bankei was sharing the Dharma with a large gathering of devoted students. The hall was filled with people sitting in quiet attention, absorbing his simple yet profound teachings about living with natural awareness. The evening light filtered through the temple windows, creating an atmosphere of peace and contemplation. In the midst of his discourse, a disturbance arose near the back of the hall. A Shinshu priest, whose own temple had been losing followers to Bankai's growing reputation, pushed his way through the crowd with obvious agitation. His face was flushed with jealousy, and his movements were sharp with competitive energy. Bankai paused his teaching and looked toward the commotion with patient curiosity. "What is this noise that interrupts our evening together?" he asked gently, his voice carrying no irritation despite the disruption. The priest stood up boldly, his voice rising above the murmur of the crowd. "The founder of our sect," he boasted loudly, "had such miraculous powers that he held a brush in his hand on one bank of the river. His attendant held up a paper on the other bank, and the teacher wrote the holy name of Amida through the air. Can you do such a wonderful thing?" The gathered students turned their attention between the challenging priest and their teacher, curious how Bankei would respond to this test of his spiritual abilities. Some expected a demonstration of supernatural powers. Others wondered if their master would engage in debate. Bankai smiled, with the gentle amusement of someone who understood the priest's confusion completely. "Perhaps your fox can perform that trick," he replied lightly. "But that is not the manner of Zen. My miracle is that when I feel hungry, I eat, and when I feel thirsty, I drink." The temple fell into profound silence as the simple profundity of these words settled into the hearts of those present. The priest, expecting magical displays, found himself face to face with a teaching about the extraordinary nature of ordinary experience. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates how real spiritual power manifests not in supernatural demonstrations, but in complete presence to what is actually happening. Why do we seek the miraculous outside of our immediate experience? Zen Buddhism reveals our tendency to bypass the profound simplicity of life in search of dramatic spiritual experiences. We imagine enlightenment as something exotic, supernatural, or removed from daily existence, when in truth, it's the capacity to be fully present to whatever is arising. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding that consciousness itself is the ultimate miracle. The fact that you can taste food, feel thirst, hear these words, or experience any sensation at all is more extraordinary than any magic trick. Yet, we take these everyday miracles for granted while seeking special powers that would somehow validate our spiritual development. Look deeply at your own experience right now. Can you feel the miracle of breathing without having to think about it? The wonder of your heart beating steadily? The extraordinary fact that light enters your eyes and somehow becomes the vision of these words? These are the real miracles available in every moment. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the Zen understanding that we don't need to become someone special to access spiritual truth. We need to fully inhabit who we already are. The Buddha taught, there are only two mistakes one can make along the road to truth: not going all the way and not starting. The path is not about developing supernatural abilities, but about going all the way into the simple reality of this moment, starting exactly where you are, with whatever you're experiencing right now. Consider how the priest's question revealed his own spiritual materialism. the belief that wisdom can be measured by impressive displays rather than by the quality of one's presence. This trap catches many seekers who mistake the extraordinary for the spiritual, when the truly spiritual is found in bringing complete attention to the ordinary. Tonight, as you eat your next meal or drink a glass of water, can you taste the miracle that Bankai pointed to? Can you experience the wonder of simple biological processes that sustain your life? As the Buddha said, the way is not in the sky, the way is in the heart. The miracles we seek are not above us, but within the simple reality of being alive. Now let us explore a story about the power of belief and the destiny we create through faith itself. This is the tale of the general and the coin that revealed truth. A Japanese general faced an impossible situation. His army was greatly outnumbered by enemy forces. The terrain favored his opponents, and by every conventional measure of military strategy, the coming battle should result in devastating defeat. Yet something deep within him remained convinced that victory was possible. Perhaps it was intuition, perhaps it was desperate hope, but he felt certain that his cause was just, and his troops, though fewer in number, possessed a fighting spirit that could overcome the odds. The problem was his soldiers. They could count as well as he could, and they had eyes to see the massive force arrayed against them. Fear rippled through their ranks like a contagion. Doubt clouded their faces. Whispered conversations filled with pessimism spread through the camp, and the general could sense that their morale was crumbling before the battle had even begun. He knew that an army convinced of its own defeat would indeed be defeated, regardless of any other factors. Technical skill, superior weapons, even numerical advantage means nothing when soldiers have already surrendered in their hearts. But an army that truly believed in its victory could accomplish seemingly impossible things through the sheer force of that conviction. On the morning of the battle, as they marched toward their destiny, the general led his troops to a small religious shrine that stood beside the road. This was a place where countless warriors had stopped over the centuries to pray before facing uncertain fate. The general gathered his men around him and led them in earnest prayer, asking for divine blessing and protection in the coming fight. When the prayers were finished, the general reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple coin. He held it high so that every soldier could see it clearly. "My brothers," he called out, his voice carrying across the assembled ranks, "we have prayed, and now we will let heaven itself reveal our destiny. I will toss this coin into the air. If it lands heads, we are fated to win this battle. If it lands tails, we are destined to lose. Let us discover what the gods have decided for us." The soldiers pressed closer, their breathing shallow with anticipation. Everything seemed to depend on this single moment, this one flip of metals spinning through the morning air. The general tossed the coin high, and every eye followed its arc as it rose, hung suspended for an instant against the sky, then fell back, down to earth. The coin landed and lay still in the dust. It was heads. A cheer erupted from the troops that could probably be heard for miles. Soldiers who had been grim and fearful moments before now laughed with joy and embraced each other with renewed confidence. The gods had spoken. Victory was assured. Their cause was blessed by heaven itself. Filled with this divine confidence, the soldiers attacked their enemies with such fierce determination and coordinated power that they achieved exactly what the coin had predicted. Against all odds, they won a decisive victory, routing forces much larger than their own and securing a triumph that would be remembered for generations. After the battle, as the general walked among his celebrating troops, his lieutenant approached him with wonder in his eyes. "General," the lieutenant said, "what an incredible thing. The coin revealed our true destiny, just as you said it would. Surely no human power can change what heaven has decreed." "You are absolutely right," the general replied with a knowing smile. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the coin, holding it so his lieutenant could examine it closely. "No one can change destiny." The lieutenant looked at the coin and gasped. Both sides showed heads. The Buddha once said, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become." Here we discover the profound truth that destiny is not something that happens to us, but something we create through the power of our own beliefs and expectations. Why do we so readily assume that fate is beyond our influence, when our own minds play such a crucial role in shaping what unfolds? Zen Buddhism teaches that while we cannot control all external circumstances, we have tremendous power over the internal conditions that determine how we respond to whatever arises. The general understood something profound about human psychology and the nature of reality itself. He knew that his soldiers' belief in victory was more important than their numerical disadvantage. He recognized that confidence, determination, and fighting spirit could overcome superior numbers when those qualities were genuinely present. But here's the deeper teaching. The general didn't simply manipulate his troops through deception. He created the conditions that allowed their natural courage and strength to emerge. The soldiers possessed the ability to fight brilliantly all along. They simply needed to believe in themselves and their cause. Consider your own relationship with destiny and possibility. How often do you assume that outcomes are predetermined, that success or failure is beyond your influence? The general's two-headed coin represents the power we all possess to tip the scales in favor of positive outcomes through the quality of our engagement with life. This doesn't mean we can control everything through positive thinking, or that believing in something makes it automatically true. The soldiers still had to fight the battle. They still had to demonstrate actual skill and courage. But their belief in victory created the psychological conditions that allowed their best qualities to manifest. In Zen practice, we learn to work skillfully with both effort and surrender, both intention and acceptance. We recognize that while we cannot dictate specific outcomes, we can profoundly influence the energy and attention we bring to any situation. This quality of engagement often determines whether we experience success or failure, regardless of external circumstances. Zen Master Huang Po taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." The general was wise enough to see that his soldiers' thoughts about the battle were more influential than their thoughts about their numerical disadvantage. He worked with the reality of psychology rather than fighting against it. Look deeply at the various challenges and opportunities in your own life. Where might you be carrying a tails mentality, assuming defeat before you fully engaged, focusing on obstacles rather than possibilities, letting fear determine your level of effort? And where might you need to create your own two-headed coin, a practice or perspective that consistently orients you toward positive engagement regardless of circumstances? The Buddha taught, "We are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world." This isn't magical thinking, but recognition of the creative power of consciousness itself. When we approach situations with genuine confidence, clarity, and commitment, we often discover capabilities we didn't know we possessed. Tonight, as you consider the battles you're facing and the outcomes you're hoping for, can you find your own version of the general's wisdom? Can you create internal conditions that support your highest possibilities rather than your deepest fears? Can you recognize that while you cannot control destiny, you have profound influence over the beliefs and attitudes that shape how destiny unfolds through you? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. The general's confidence lit the flame of belief in every soldier's heart. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is create the conditions that allow others and ourselves to discover the strength that was there all along. Our next story reveals the power of returning to what is real when fear threatens to overwhelm us. This is the tale of the captured warrior. In ancient Japan, during a time of constant warfare between rival clans, a skilled warrior found himself on the losing side of a fierce battle. As his comrades fell around him and defeat became inevitable, he was captured by enemy soldiers and dragged away from the battlefield, his armor stripped, his weapons confiscated. That evening, they threw him into a dark, cramped prison cell with stone walls that seemed to press in from all sides. The heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through his bones. As darkness settled over the prison, the warrior's mind began to race with terrifying possibilities. Tomorrow, they would come for him. He knew the customs of war. First would come the interrogation, designed to extract information about his lord's defenses, troop movements, and strategic plans. When he refused to speak, as honor demanded, they would resort to torture. Hot iron, bamboo splinters under his fingernails, methods he had heard described in hushed tones by other warriors. And when they had extracted what they could, or when they grew tired of his silence, would come the execution. As these thoughts consumed him, his heart began to pound so violently he feared it might burst. His breathing became shallow and rapid. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool night air. Sleep seemed impossible as his mind conjured increasingly vivid scenarios of tomorrow's suffering. Hours passed in this torment. The warrior paced his small cell, sat against the cold stone wall, lay on the straw-covered floor. Nothing brought relief from the visions of impending doom that played repeatedly in his mind like a terrible dream he couldn't escape. Then, in the depths of his despair, he remembered the gentle voice of his Zen master back at the monastery where he had studied before becoming a warrior. The old teacher's words came to him as clearly as if the master were sitting beside him in the cell. Tomorrow is not real, it is an illusion. The only reality is now. At first, the warrior's frightened mind resisted these words. How could tomorrow be an illusion when the threats were so concrete, so inevitable? But as he sat quietly and allowed the teaching to penetrate deeper, something began to shift. He noticed his breathing. In this moment, he was breathing freely. He felt the straw beneath him, rough but not uncomfortable. He heard the sound of wind moving through the trees outside his window, a sound that spoke of the natural world, continuing its ancient rhythms regardless of human conflict. In this moment, he was not being tortured. In this moment, he was not dying. In this moment, there was simply a man sitting in a cell, alive and aware. The terrors that had seemed so overwhelming moments before revealed themselves to be nothing more than thoughts about a future that existed only in his imagination. As this understanding deepened, A profound peace settled over the warrior. His breathing slowed and deepened. His racing heart found a steady rhythm. For the first time since his capture, he smiled. The master's wisdom had freed him from a prison far more confining than the stone walls around him, the prison of anxious thoughts about tomorrow. Within minutes, the warrior fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. The Buddha once said, "If you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions." This ancient wisdom illuminates the profound truth the warrior discovered in his cell. The only moment in which we ever actually live is this one. Why do we torture ourselves with endless scenarios about the future? Zen Buddhism explains that our minds evolved as survival mechanisms, constantly scanning for threats and planning for protection. While this capacity serves us in genuine emergencies, it becomes a source of suffering when we mistake mental projections for reality. Look deeply at your own experience. How much of your anxiety stems from vivid imaginings of future scenarios that may never occur? The presentation you're worried about, the medical test results you're awaiting, the difficult conversation you need to have. These situations exist primarily in thought, not in present reality. The warrior's teaching shows us that we can acknowledge future challenges without being consumed by them. Planning and preparation have their place, but when they transform into obsessive worry, they rob us of peace and clarity. As Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, thanks to impermanence, everything is possible. The future remains unwritten, shaped by causes and conditions we cannot fully predict or control. The worried mind assumes that current difficulties will inevitably continue or worsen, but impermanence teaches us that everything changes. The warrior in his cell could not know what the next day would actually bring. Perhaps his lord's forces would mount a rescue. Perhaps his captors would show mercy. Perhaps diplomatic negotiations would secure his release. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "The past is gone, the future is not yet here, and there is only one moment for you to live." This teaching doesn't encourage us to ignore future responsibilities or avoid reasonable planning. Instead, it invites us to recognize where our attention habitually goes, and to gently guide it back to the richness of present experience. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called beginner's mind, approaching each moment with fresh awareness rather than predetermined anxiety. When we truly inhabit the present, we often discover that it contains resources for peace and clarity that worried thinking never revealed. Consider how the warrior's shift in attention transformed his entire experience. The same cell, the same uncertain future, but by returning to present moment awareness, suffering transformed into peace. This transformation is available to us in every moment of anxiety or fear. Tonight, as you notice your mind creating stories about tomorrow's challenges, remember the captured warrior and his master's wisdom. What is actually happening right now? What simple experiences, breathing, sitting, the temperature of the air, are available to anchor you in reality rather than imagination? As the Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. In this teaching lies the key to the warrior's prison and our own. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the ultimate nature of spiritual truth. This is the encounter between the emperor and the master. In ancient China, there ruled an emperor known throughout the land for his devotion to the Buddhist path. Unlike rulers who concern themselves only with wealth and territory, this emperor had spent years studying sacred texts, supporting monasteries, and seeking the deepest truths of existence. His palace library contained thousands of scrolls, and he had invited many learned monks to share their wisdom. When word reached him of a great Zen master whose understanding transcended conventional knowledge, the emperor immediately sent an invitation. He longed to test his own understanding against this master's renowned wisdom. The day of the master's arrival, the palace buzzed with anticipation. The emperor had prepared elaborate questions that would demonstrate both his devotion and sophisticated grasp of Buddhist doctrine. Surely such preparation would impress even the most accomplished teacher. When the master entered the throne room, he appeared utterly ordinary. His robes were simple and travel-worn, his bearing humble, yet alert. The emperor, seated on his golden throne beneath paintings of Buddhist saints, felt both excited and nervous. "Venerable master," the emperor began, his voice echoing through the vast hall decorated with precious statues and sacred symbols. "I have studied the Buddhist teachings for many years. I have built temples, supported monks, and devoted my life to understanding the sacred path. Now I ask you, what is the highest truth of the holy Buddhist doctrine?" The emperor leaned forward expectantly, anticipating a profound discourse that would confirm his years of study. Perhaps the master would elaborate on the Four Noble Truths or reveal some secret teaching passed down through generations. Instead, the master looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a gaze that seemed to see through all pretense. His response came quietly. "Vast emptiness, and not a trace of holiness." Silence filled the throne room. The emperor blinked, certain he had misheard. Where was the elaborate explanation of Buddhist cosmology? Where were the references to sacred texts and divine principles? "If there is no holiness," the emperor asked, his voice betraying confusion and dismay, "then who or what are you? If there is no sacred truth to attain, what makes you a master?" The emperor's questions carried the weight of years spent accumulating spiritual knowledge and religious merit. He had built his identity around being a devout Buddhist ruler, and this master's words seemed to dissolve the foundation of that carefully constructed self-image. The master's response came with the same quiet directness. "I do not know." With these three simple words, the master had stripped away every concept, every identity, every claim to understanding that the emperor had accumulated. The master departed as simply as he had arrived, leaving the emperor in contemplative silence. As the Buddha observed, "Those who think they know, don't know. Those who know they don't know, know." This paradoxical teaching points to the heart of Zen understanding. True wisdom begins not with accumulating knowledge, but with recognizing the limitations of conceptual thinking itself. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual seeking often becomes another form of grasping. We collect teachings and insights like precious jewels, believing enlightenment lies in acquiring enough sacred knowledge. But ultimate truth cannot be possessed or described in conventional terms. The master's declaration of vast emptiness points to shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This doesn't mean nothing exists, but that nothing exists in the solid, independent way our thoughts assume. Every phenomenon arises interdependently without fixed essence. This emptiness is not a concept to understand, but a reality to embody. When the master says there is not a trace of holiness, He's not denying spiritual experience, but pointing to truth that transcends dualistic thinking, separating sacred from ordinary. The very search for holiness implies our present experience lacks something essential when completeness is already here. Consider how this teaching might illuminate your spiritual journey. Have you noticed how the mind tries to turn insights into possessions? We have powerful experiences and want to understand, categorize, and repeat them. Yet each time we grasp, we move away from the simple presence that made them possible. The emperor represents the sincere seeker who has confused spiritual materialism with genuine awakening. His years of study weren't meaningless, but they had become obstacles to direct recognition of what was always present. The master's "I do not know" represents the wisdom of don't know mind. This is not ignorance, but open unknowing that remains receptive to what is actually happening rather than filtering through preconceptions. From this mind, appropriate action arises without conceptual interference. In our culture that prizes knowledge, admitting "I don't know" feels like failure. But in Zen understanding, this acknowledgement becomes a doorway to fresh perception. The expert mind sees what it expects. The beginner's mind sees what is actually there. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's presence, what would it be like to temporarily set aside everything you think you know about spirituality? Can you taste the freedom in not knowing, the spaciousness that opens when we stop trying to fill emptiness with concepts? As the Buddha taught, in the sky, there is no distinction of east and west. People create distinctions out of their own minds and then believe them to be true. The vast emptiness the master pointed to is infinitely spacious, containing all possibilities while being limited by none. In recognizing this emptiness as our true nature, we discover the most ordinary miracle. This moment, exactly as it is, lacking nothing. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a teaching about the profound difference between passive surrender and active compassion. This is the parable of the lion and the fox. In a land where drought had lasted many months and both humans and animals struggled to find sustenance, there lived a man whose heart burned with spiritual longing. Every day he prayed with desperate intensity, asking for the awareness and wisdom that would bring success to his life. His prayers were sincere, but filled with anxiety, for he had tried many approaches to prosperity, various jobs, different strategies, numerous plans, yet nothing had brought him the security and fulfillment he sought. His frustration grew as his resources dwindled and his situation became increasingly precarious. There must be some secret to life that I'm missing, he thought. Some spiritual principle that, once understood, will unlock the doors to abundance and peace. One night, after hours of fervent prayer, he fell into a deep sleep and began to dream. In his dream, a voice spoke to him with crystal clarity. "Go into the forest tomorrow morning. There you will find the understanding you seek." The man woke with his heart pounding with excitement and hope. This felt different from ordinary dreams. The voice had carried such authority, such certainty. Without delay, he prepared simple provisions and set out at first light for the ancient forest that bordered his village. For several hours, he wandered among towering trees and winding paths, his eyes searching for some sign, some teacher, some revelation that would provide the answers to his prayers. The morning air was cool and fragrant with wildflowers, but his anxiety made it difficult to appreciate the natural beauty surrounding him. As midday heat began to build, Exhaustion forced him to rest beside a small stream. He sat on a smooth boulder, wondering if he had misunderstood the dream's message, when movement caught his eye between two large rocks in a shaded alcove nearby. To his amazement, he discovered a fox lying peacefully in the cool space. But this fox had no legs. Where its limbs should have been, there were only healed scars. Yet the animal appeared calm and well-nourished rather than starving or distressed as he would have expected. How extraordinary, the man thought. How does a creature with no ability to hunt or forage manage to survive in the wilderness? Curious and sensing this might be connected to his spiritual quest, he concealed himself and waited to see what would happen. As the sun began to set, painting the forest in golden light, he heard heavy footsteps approaching through the underbrush. A magnificent lion emerged into the clearing, carrying fresh meat in its powerful jaws. Without any apparent reason or expectation of return, the lion gently placed the meat directly in front of the legless fox and then disappeared back into the forest. The man's heart leaped with understanding. "Ah," he exclaimed silently, "now I see the secret to success in life. The answer is complete surrender and trust. I don't need to struggle and strive and worry about providing for myself. All I need to do is have faith that the universe will take care of all my needs. God will provide everything, just as the lion provides for the fox. My role is simply to trust and receive." Filled with this new spiritual insight, the man returned home and immediately began practicing what he believed he had learned. He stopped seeking work, stopped making efforts to improve his situation, and instead spent his days in prayer and meditation, waiting for providence to supply his needs as it had for the legless fox. Days passed, then weeks. His food stores depleted, his strength began to fade, and his situation became desperate. Yet he maintained his faith that his surrender would be rewarded, that his trust would be vindicated by divine intervention. 2 weeks into this experiment, weak from hunger and beginning to doubt his interpretation, the man had another vivid dream. The same authoritative voice that had sent him to the forest now spoke again, but this time with a tone of gentle correction. "Fool," the voice said, not with cruelty, but with compassionate clarity. "Be like the lion, not like the fox." Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened." The story points us toward understanding the profound difference between spiritual surrender and spiritual service. Why do we sometimes mistake passivity for spiritual practice? Zen Buddhism reveals that our ego mind often seeks the path of least resistance, preferring to receive rather than give, to be cared for rather than to care for others. True surrender involves releasing our attachment to outcomes while maintaining wholehearted engagement with compassionate action. The man's initial interpretation represented a common spiritual misunderstanding, the belief that faith means waiting for external forces to solve our problems. But genuine spiritual maturity involves recognizing our responsibility to be the hands and heart through which compassion flows into the world. Look deeply at your own relationship to giving and receiving. Are there areas where you've been waiting for others to provide what you could offer yourself? Perhaps waiting for someone else to create the community you long for, to start the project you've envisioned, or to show the kindness you wish to see in the world. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between victim consciousness and co-creator consciousness. The fox, through no choice of its own, required care, and received it through the lion's generosity. But humans possess capacities the fox lacks: intelligence, creativity, the ability to plan and provide not only for ourselves, but for others who truly cannot provide for themselves. The deeper teaching here shows us that spiritual awakening doesn't exempt us from worldly responsibility, but transforms how we engage with it. True faith isn't passive waiting, but active participation in the web of interdependence that connects all beings. We are called to be both lion and fox, receiving grace when we genuinely need it, offering strength when others require our support. Consider the people in your life who might be in the fox's position through circumstances beyond their control: illness, age, disability, or temporary crisis. And consider the areas where you have lion-like capacities, skills, resources, energy, or opportunities that could serve others' well-being. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things." This teaching points toward the natural movement from self-preoccupation to selfless service that marks spiritual maturity. The man's transformation from seeking to be cared for to recognizing his calling to care for others represents the shift from spiritual materialism to genuine Dharma practice. Instead of using spirituality to get what we want, we begin using our gifts to give what others need. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, the aspiration to work for the liberation of all beings rather than seeking only our own comfort and security. This doesn't mean we neglect our genuine needs, but that we hold them within the larger context of universal well-being. The Buddha said, "If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path." Often, the success and fulfillment we seek comes not through focusing on our own needs, but through dedicating ourselves to serving something greater than our personal concerns. This teaching challenges us to examine our motivations for spiritual practice itself. Are we seeking enlightenment as a form of ultimate self-improvement? Or are we cultivating wisdom and compassion to better serve the world's needs? Are we praying for divine provision? Or are we asking how we can become instruments of provision for others? The voice in the dream offered correction with love, not condemnation. The man's initial misunderstanding was part of his learning process, not a spiritual failure. Sometimes we need to experience our own helplessness before we can understand our power to help others. Tonight, as you consider the gifts and capacities you've been given, can you sense how they might be intended, not just for your own security, but for the welfare of others? Can you feel the difference between spiritual seeking that focuses on what you can get and spiritual practice that asks what you can give? As the Buddha taught, in caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others. The lion's generous feeding of the fox represents the natural flow of compassion that arises when we recognize our fundamental interconnection. By being the lion when we can, we ensure that others will be lions for us when we truly need their care. Now, let us turn to a tale about the difference between wisdom and words that attempt to contain it. This is the story of the pointing finger. In a peaceful valley monastery where evening mist gathered among ancient pines, a beloved Zen teacher enjoyed his daily ritual of walking with his faithful dog. The animal's joy was infectious, bounding ahead to retrieve sticks and returning with tail wagging, eyes bright with simple happiness. On this particular evening, the teacher invited one of his most promising students to join them. The young man was brilliant, his mind sharp as a blade, and equally capable of cutting through complex philosophical concepts. Yet this very intelligence had become a source of suffering. The more he studied Buddhist texts, the more contradictions he discovered. His bright mind seemed to be creating obstacles rather than clearing them. As they walked along the familiar trail, the student voiced his frustration. "Master, I struggle with contradictions in our teachings. Some texts speak of emptiness, others of Buddha nature. Some emphasize effort, others effortless being. How can these opposing instructions both be true?" The teacher listened with patient attention. He understood that intellectual brilliance could become a trap when the mind tried to grasp truth like solving a mathematical equation. Truth required a different kind of knowing altogether. "You must understand," the teacher said gently, "that words are only guideposts. Never let words or symbols get in the way of truth. Here, I'll show you." The teacher called his dog, who came running with eager enthusiasm. The full moon hung low in the darkening sky, its silver light beginning to emerge as daylight faded. The teacher pointed directly at the luminous orb and spoke to his pet with the same tone he used for their usual games. "Fetch me the moon," he commanded, his finger extended clearly toward the celestial body. The dog's response was immediate and predictable. His gaze fixed intently on the teacher's outstretched finger, following its movement with focused attention he typically reserved for thrown sticks. The animal's entire being concentrated on the pointing digit, completely oblivious to the moon hanging magnificently above. The teacher turned to his confused student with a knowing smile. "Where is my dog looking?" The student observed the scene with growing awareness. "He's looking at your finger," he replied, beginning to sense the deeper lesson. "Exactly," the teacher confirmed. "Don't be like my dog. Don't confuse the pointing finger with the thing being pointed at. All our Buddhist words are only guideposts. Every person must fight their way through other people's words to find their own truth." The young student stood in silence, feeling something shift in his understanding. The moon shone overhead, its light touching everything equally, regardless of whether anyone pointed at it. The truth was like that moon, present and luminous, independent of any description or analysis. As the Buddha observed, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." This teaching addresses the exact confusion that plagued the bright student, mistaking concepts about truth for truth itself. Here we discover how intellectual understanding, while valuable, can become a barrier when we rely on it exclusively. The student's brilliant mind was capable of analyzing and comparing teachings, but analysis alone cannot deliver the direct experience that spiritual awakening requires. Like the dog fixated on the finger, he had become so focused on examining words and concepts that he missed the reality they attempted to indicate. Why do we become trapped in conceptual understanding? The thinking mind operates through division and comparison, understanding by breaking things into categories. But ultimate truth transcends these dualistic distinctions. It cannot be captured in concepts any more than the moon can be held in a photograph. This creates what Zen calls the great doubt, the frustrating recognition that our usual ways of knowing are inadequate for the most important questions. Different teachings use different words to point toward the same ineffable reality, like multiple fingers pointing at the same moon from various angles. Consider how this pattern manifests in spiritual seeking. We collect teachings like treasures, memorizing quotes from masters, analyzing meditation techniques, comparing different traditions. All of this can be valuable, but becomes problematic when we mistake accumulation of spiritual knowledge for spiritual development itself. Zen teacher D.T. Suzuki said, "The finger pointing at the moon is not the moon." This applies not only to spiritual teachings, but to all areas where we confuse the map for the territory. In relationships, we can become so focused on analyzing the relationship that we lose touch with the actual experience of loving. In nature, we can become so busy photographing that we miss the immediate wonder of simply being present. The moon represents what Zen calls our original nature, the awareness that exists prior to all concepts and categories. This awareness is always present, just as the moon exists whether or not anyone points at it. It doesn't need to be created or achieved, only recognized. This doesn't mean abandoning study or intellectual understanding. The teacher himself used words and concepts to convey his lesson. Rather, it means holding our conceptual knowledge lightly, using it as a tool rather than an end goal. Like a ladder that helps us reach a roof, spiritual teachings can be discarded once they've served their purpose. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable complexity of modern life, can you distinguish between the pointing fingers and what they point toward? When you study spiritual teachings or seek guidance, can you remember that words are merely fingers pointing at the moon of your own innate wisdom? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, work out your salvation with diligence. The work involves not just understanding teachings intellectually, but moving through them to the reality they indicate. Let us now turn to a story about the nature of identity and the mystery of consciousness itself. This is the tale of Chuang-Tzu and the butterfly. The ancient Taoist sage Chuang-Tzu lived simply, spending his days in quiet contemplation of the natural world and the deeper mysteries of existence. He was known for his profound insights into the nature of reality and his ability to see beyond the surface appearances that convince most people they understand the world around them. One afternoon, after a morning of walking through bamboo groves and observing the play of light on water, Chuang-Tzu lay down beneath a flowering tree to rest. The gentle warmth of the sun, the soft sound of wind through leaves, and the fragrance of spring blossoms created the perfect conditions for deep relaxation. As he settled into this peaceful state, his consciousness gradually shifted from ordinary waking awareness into the mysterious realm of dreams. In his dream, something extraordinary occurred. Chuang-Tzu found himself transformed into a beautiful butterfly, his human form completely forgotten. He fluttered gracefully from flower to flower, his delicate wings catching the sunlight as he moved through a world of pure color and sensation. There was no memory of being a philosopher, no awareness of human concerns or intellectual pursuits. He was simply and completely a butterfly, experiencing the world through compound eyes, navigating by instinct, living entirely in the present moment of flight and discovery. The butterfly that was Chuang-Tzu felt utterly free, unburdened by the heavy thoughts and complex worries that typically occupy human consciousness. There was only the joy of movement, the sweetness of nectar, the warm touch of sun on delicate wings. This wasn't a dream about being a butterfly while knowing he was really a man. It was the complete experience of butterfly existence, with no trace of human identity remaining. Then, as suddenly as the transformation had occurred, Chuang Tzu awakened. He found himself lying beneath the tree, the afternoon sun having moved across the sky during his sleep. His human body felt solid and familiar, his philosopher's mind immediately active with questions and observations. The vivid dream began to fade as waking consciousness reasserted itself. But instead of simply dismissing the experience as an unusual dream, Chuang Tzu found himself puzzled by a profound question that challenged everything he thought he knew about identity and reality. He sat up slowly, still feeling the lingering sensation of flight, and pondered the implications of what had just occurred. Was I just now a man dreaming I was a butterfly? He wondered aloud. Or am I perhaps a butterfly now dreaming that I am a man? The question wasn't merely playful speculation. It pointed to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness and identity that most people never consider. If the experience of being a butterfly had felt completely real and authentic while it was happening, how could he be certain that his current experience of being human was any more real or permanent? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, all conditioned existence is impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. This ancient teaching illuminates the fluid nature of identity and the importance of not clinging too tightly to any particular sense of self. Why do we assume that our current state of consciousness represents the ultimate reality? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to take our present experience as fixed and absolute, when in fact, all states of consciousness, waking, dreaming, sleeping, are temporary and constantly changing phenomena arising in the vast space of awareness. Chuang Tzu's question challenges our basic assumptions about who and what we are. During the dream, the butterfly identity felt completely authentic and real. Upon waking, the human identity seems equally authentic and real. But which one represents his true nature? Or is perhaps the question itself based on a false premise? Consider your own experience of identity throughout different states of consciousness. Are you the same you when you're dreaming as when you're awake? What about when you're deeply absorbed in an activity, or in deep meditation, or in moments of creative flow when self-consciousness disappears entirely? Which of these states represents your real identity? In Zen practice, we explore the possibility that all these different identities are simply temporary appearances in consciousness, like waves on the ocean or clouds in the sky. The waves are real, but they're not separate from the ocean. The clouds are real, but they're not separate from the sky. Similarly, all our various identities and experiences are real, but they're not separate from the underlying awareness in which they appear. The butterfly dream reveals something profound about the nature of transformation and possibility. If Chuang Tzu could completely become a butterfly in his dream consciousness, what does that suggest about the fixed boundaries we imagine exist around our identity? How solid are the limitations we place on ourselves based on our current circumstances or self-concept? Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." Chuang Tzu's experience points to this same teaching. The more deeply we investigate the nature of selfhood, the more we discover that our fixed ideas about identity begin to dissolve. The Buddha said, "Form is emptiness, emptiness is form." The man and the butterfly are both real and both empty of permanent, independent existence. They are temporary formations in the field of consciousness, each authentic while present, each naturally dissolving to make way for whatever comes next. Look deeply at your own sense of identity. How much of who you think you are is based on roles, memories, and concepts that are actually quite fluid and changeable? What would remain if you let go of your attachment to being any particular type of person? Tonight, as you move between waking consciousness and the dream state, can you remember Chuang Tzu's profound question? Can you hold your identity lightly, recognizing that whether you're experiencing yourself as human or butterfly, worker or dreamer, the awareness in which all these experiences arise remains constant and unbound? As the Buddha observed, everything is impermanent. Strive on with awareness. The man dreams of being a butterfly. The butterfly dreams of being a man. But the dreaming itself, the pure capacity for experience, remains as vast and free as the sky, untouched by whatever temporary forms dance within it. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete, the rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud," and so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" and so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. I'll be happy when I get promoted, only to discover new stresses. I'll be content with more money, only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Our next story reveals the difference between technical mastery and true mastery of oneself. This is the lesson of the archer and the bridge. A young man had devoted years to perfecting his skill with the bow and arrow. Day after day, he practiced in all weather conditions, his dedication absolute, his focus unwavering. His technique became flawless, his aim so precise that he rarely missed his target, even at great distances. Word of his remarkable ability spread throughout the region, and he began winning archery contests one after another, each victory feeding his growing pride and confidence. Flush with success, and perhaps a bit intoxicated by his own reputation, the young archer decided to seek out the ultimate challenge. He had heard whispered stories of an old Zen master who lived high in the mountains, a man renowned not only for his spiritual wisdom, but also for his legendary skill with the bow. "I will challenge this old master," the young man thought, "and when I defeat him, everyone will know that I am the greatest archer in all the land." He found the master's simple dwelling and issued his challenge with the confidence of youth. "Old man," he said, perhaps more boldly than was respectful, "I have heard of your reputation with the bow. I challenge you to demonstrate whether your skill can match mine." The master, ancient eyes twinkling with quiet amusement, simply nodded his acceptance. The young archer immediately set up his demonstration. He selected a target at a considerable distance, drew his bow with practiced precision, and let loose his arrow. It flew straight and true, striking the exact center of the bullseye with a satisfying thud. Without pausing, he notched a second arrow, drew, aimed, and fired again. This arrow split the first arrow down its center, a feat of such technical brilliance that few archers in the world could have accomplished it. The young man turned to the master with obvious satisfaction, his chest puffed with pride. "There," he said, gesturing toward his perfect demonstration. "Let's see if you can match that display of skill." The old master looked at the target, then at the young man, and smiled gently. But instead of drawing his own bow, he simply motioned for the archer to follow him. "Come," he said quietly, "let us find a more suitable place for this demonstration." Curious about what the old man had in mind, and confident that no location could diminish his superior abilities, the young archer followed the master up a winding mountain path. They climbed higher and higher, the air growing thinner, the path more treacherous, until finally they reached a place where the mountain was split by a deep chasm. Spanning this terrifying gap was a single fallen log, weathered and narrow, that served as a bridge between the two sides. Far below, so far that the bottom disappeared into shadow, the chasm yawned like a hungry mouth. The slightest misstep would mean certain death. Without a word, the old master calmly stepped out onto this precarious bridge. His movements were unhurried, graceful, completely at ease despite the mortal danger. When he reached the center of the log, where it sagged slightly and swayed with his weight, he paused and turned to face a distant tree on the far side of the chasm. Drawing his bow with the same casual precision he might use in his own garden, the master took aim and released his arrow. It flew across the void and struck the distant tree with a clean, direct hit. Not necessarily more accurate than the young man's shots, but accomplished under conditions that would challenge even the most seasoned warrior. The master then gracefully stepped back onto solid ground and gestured toward the log bridge. "Now it is your turn," he said simply. The young archer approached the edge of the chasm and looked down into the seemingly bottomless abyss. His mouth went dry, his palms began to sweat, and his legs trembled beneath him. The very thought of stepping onto that narrow, unstable bridge filled him with paralyzing terror. The technical skill that had made him so confident suddenly seemed irrelevant in the face of this primal fear. He tried to force himself forward, but his body refused to obey. His hands shook so violently that he couldn't even grip his bow properly, much less aim with any precision. The steady breathing and focused concentration that had served him so well in controlled conditions completely abandoned him. The master watched this struggle with compassionate understanding. "You have developed great skill with your bow," he observed gently, "but you have little skill with the mind that lets loose the shot." As the Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between mastery of technique and mastery of the mind that employs the technique. Why do we so often mistake technical proficiency for true mastery? Zen Buddhism points to our tendency to focus on external accomplishments while neglecting the inner development that makes those accomplishments meaningful. We perfect our skills in controlled environments, but discover our limitations when facing uncertainty, danger, or genuine challenge. The young archer had indeed achieved remarkable technical skill, but only under ideal conditions. When his environment changed, when fear entered the equation, when the stakes became real, when his sense of safety was threatened, his carefully cultivated abilities disappeared entirely. His mastery was revealed to be shallow, dependent on external circumstances rather than inner stability. Consider your own areas of expertise. How does your competence hold up under pressure? When faced with genuine stakes, unfamiliar circumstances, or emotional challenges, Do your skills remain intact, or do they crumble like the young archer's confidence on the bridge? In Zen practice, we cultivate what might be called unshakable presence, the ability to remain centered and effective regardless of external conditions. This doesn't mean eliminating fear or challenge, but developing the inner stability that allows us to function skillfully even when afraid, uncertain, or under pressure. The master's demonstration wasn't about showing superior archery skills. It was about revealing the profound difference between skill that depends on perfect conditions and skill that emerges from inner mastery. His arrow didn't need to be more accurate than the young man's. It simply needed to be released from a place of genuine equanimity. Zen Master Bankei taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle any situation." This points to a quality of awareness that remains constant, whether we're shooting at safe targets or standing on precipices. It's the difference between confidence that comes from controlling our environment and confidence that comes from trusting our ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." One arrow shot from genuine presence and inner stability has more value than 1,000 arrows shot from ego and carefully controlled conditions. True mastery reveals itself not in perfect circumstances, but in our ability to maintain our center when everything around us is uncertain. Look deeply at your own relationship to challenge and fear. Where in your life do you perform well in safe, controlled environments but struggle when stakes are raised or conditions become unpredictable? This isn't a failure. It's simply information about where your practice needs to deepen. Tonight, as you consider the various skills and competencies you've developed, can you distinguish between those that depend on perfect conditions and those that remain stable under pressure? Can you sense the difference between the confidence that comes from avoiding challenge and the confidence that comes from meeting challenge with presence? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, chaos is inherent in all compounded things. Strive on with diligence. Life is the bridge over the chasm, uncertain, sometimes frightening, always requiring us to find our balance, not in the safety of solid ground, but in our ability to remain centered while walking through space. True mastery isn't about perfect aim. It's about maintaining our equilibrium, no matter where we find ourselves standing. Let us continue our journey with a story about the unexpected wisdom found in laughter and the suffering we create through taking ourselves too seriously. This is the tale of the monk who discovered his true teacher. In a remote mountain monastery in ancient China, there lived a young monk who approached his spiritual practice with tremendous intensity. Every morning before dawn, he would rise for meditation, sitting in perfect posture for hours without moving. He studied the Buddhist texts with scholarly precision, memorizing sutras and debating philosophical points with fierce concentration. His fellow monks often remarked on his seriousness and dedication to the Dharma. One crisp autumn morning, while studying a particularly complex passage about the nature of emptiness, the young monk encountered something that completely baffled him. The text seemed to contradict everything he thought he understood about Buddhist philosophy. The words appeared clear enough individually, but their meaning together seemed to dissolve into paradox the moment he thought he grasped it. Determined to understand, he carefully marked the passage and made his way to the master's quarters. The old teacher sat in his simple room, sunlight streaming through paper windows, creating patterns of light and shadow on the wooden floor. "Venerable master," the monk said, bowing deeply, "I have encountered a teaching that I cannot comprehend. Could you please illuminate its meaning for me?" He recited the passage with careful precision, explaining his confusion and the various interpretations he had considered. The master listened attentively, nodding occasionally, his expression thoughtful and engaged. When the young monk finished his earnest explanation, something unexpected happened. The master's face suddenly broke into a broad smile, then quiet chuckling, and finally erupted into hearty, uncontrollable laughter. His whole body shook with mirth, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. The monk stood frozen, completely bewildered. This was not the response he had anticipated. Where he expected profound wisdom and careful explanation, he found only laughter. The master's amusement seemed to fill the entire room, echoing off the walls and growing even more intense. Without offering any explanation, the master stood up, still laughing, and walked out of the room, leaving the young monk alone with his confusion and growing distress. For the next 3 days, the monk could think of nothing else. The master's inexplicable laughter haunted him constantly. He barely touched his meals, his meditation was scattered and unfocused, and sleep came only in brief, restless intervals. The question consumed him entirely. Why had his sincere spiritual inquiry been met with such puzzling amusement? Other monks noticed his distressed state, but his responses to their concerns were vague and troubled. He felt humiliated, confused, and increasingly agitated. Had the master been mocking his understanding? Was his question somehow foolish? Did his years of dedicated practice mean nothing? Finally, unable to bear the torment any longer, he returned to the master's room. This time, he didn't bow or recite passages. Instead, he spoke directly from his heart. "Master, for 3 days I have been deeply disturbed by your reaction to my question. I cannot eat, sleep, or meditate properly. Please tell me, why did you laugh at my sincere seeking? Have I done something wrong?" The master's expression became gentle and compassionate. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him, then spoke with quiet clarity. "Monk, do you know what your problem is?" the master asked kindly. "Your problem is that you are worse than a clown." The words hit the young monk like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock and dismay. "Venerable sir, how can you say such a thing? How can I be worse than a clown? I have dedicated my life to spiritual practice, to understanding the Buddha's teachings. I have sacrificed worldly pleasures and pursued wisdom with complete sincerity. How can you compare me to a mere entertainer?" The master smiled warmly and explained, "A clown's greatest joy comes from making people laugh. When others laugh, the clown feels fulfilled and happy. His entire purpose is to bring lightness and joy to the world. But you, when another person laughs, you feel disturbed, upset, and tormented. Tell me, are you not worse than a clown?" At these words, understanding dawned like sunrise breaking through clouds. The young monk saw immediately how his attachment to being taken seriously had created his suffering. He had been so invested in his image as a dedicated practitioner that he couldn't receive the master's joy. The laughter hadn't been mockery. It had been pure delight at the beauty of the Dharma expressing itself through paradox. In that moment of recognition, the monk began to laugh. First quietly, then with growing freedom and joy. He laughed at his own seriousness, at his attachment to understanding, at the beautiful absurdity of seeking enlightenment so grimly. His laughter joined with the master's from 3 days earlier, and in that shared joy, understanding flowered naturally. As the Buddha observed, If you light a lamp for somebody, it will also brighten your path. The heart of this lesson lies in recognizing how our reactions to others reveal the state of our own minds. Why do we become disturbed when others express joy in ways we don't understand? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns that create this type of suffering. First is our attachment to being understood and validated. The young monk's disturbance stemmed not from the master's laughter itself, but from his need for his question to be received with the seriousness he felt it deserved. Second is our identification with our spiritual image. When we become attached to being seen as sincere seekers, dedicated practitioners, or wise students, we lose the spontaneity and openness that allows genuine learning. The monk's investment in his identity as a serious practitioner made him unable to receive the teaching that was being offered through laughter. Third is our limited understanding of how wisdom can be transmitted. We expect spiritual teaching to arrive in familiar forms, solemn explanations, careful analysis, traditional formats. But enlightenment often comes through unexpected doorways. A master's laughter, a child's innocent question, the sound of a bell, or a moment of complete ordinariness. Consider how often we miss teachings because they don't match our expectations. Perhaps someone's casual comment contains exactly the insight we need, but we dismiss it because the person seems less knowledgeable than us. Maybe life presents us with lessons through situations we find annoying or people we consider frivolous. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." The young monk's expertise had become a barrier to learning. His certainty about how spiritual teaching should look prevented him from receiving the profound lesson being offered through unexpected laughter. The story points us toward a fundamental question. Are we seeking understanding, or are we seeking to be understood? Are we open to wisdom arriving in any form, or do we require it to validate our preconceptions? The master's laughter was a teaching about the joy inherent in the Dharma itself, the playful, spontaneous, beyond logic nature of awakened understanding. Tonight, as you encounter responses from others that don't match your expectations, can you remember the monk's revelation? Perhaps someone's laughter when you expected seriousness, their casualness when you hoped for depth, or their joy when you felt the situation called for gravity might contain teachings you haven't yet recognized. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." The master's laughter was not diminishing the Dharma, but celebrating its inexhaustible joy, a joy the monk discovered he could share rather than resist. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the irreplaceable nature of direct spiritual transmission. This is the tale of Bankei and the messenger. In the bustling capital city, where merchants haggled in crowded marketplaces and scholars debated in tea houses, the renowned Zen master Bankei had completed another period of teaching at one of the great temples. Known throughout the region for his profound insight and ability to point students directly toward their Buddha nature, Bankei maintained a simple practice of traveling between temples, offering instruction wherever sincere students gathered. As the master prepared to depart for his next destination, carefully folding his few possessions into a traveling bundle, a well-dressed gentleman approached him with urgent politeness. The man's fine silk robes and careful manner suggested someone accustomed to moving in aristocratic circles, likely a retainer or aide to one of the noble families that supported the temple. "Venerable master," the gentleman said, bowing deeply, "I come with a request from the Baron. a man of great learning and sincere interest in your teachings. He has heard of your wisdom and wishes desperately to meet with you personally, but urgent matters have detained him today. Would you consider postponing your departure by 1 day so that he might have the honor of studying with you tomorrow? Bankei, despite his eagerness to reach the next temple where students awaited him, recognized the genuine need in the request. The path of a teacher required flexibility and compassion, even when inconvenient. "Of course," he replied simply. "I shall remain 1 more day." The master unpacked his bundle and settled back into the temple quarters, spending the evening in quiet meditation and preparation for what he anticipated would be a meaningful encounter with a sincere seeker. He had met many nobles over the years who approached Zen with genuine humility despite their worldly status, and he looked forward to offering whatever guidance might be helpful. The next morning arrived with clear skies and the sound of temple bells calling the community to meditation. Bankei waited in his designated meeting room as the appointed time approached. But instead of the Baron himself, the same well-dressed gentleman appeared again, this time with obvious embarrassment written across his features. "Master," the man began, his voice heavy with apology, "I bring regrettable news. The Baron was called away on urgent business that could not be delayed, matters of state that demanded his immediate attention. However, he has not forgotten his desire for your teaching. He has asked me to serve as his representative, to receive your instruction on his behalf, and carry your wisdom back to him faithfully." The gentleman paused, clearly hoping this arrangement would prove acceptable. "The Baron's specific question concerns the nature of mind itself. He wishes to understand, what is the true nature of consciousness, and how can one realize it directly? If you would share your teaching on this matter, I promise to convey every word exactly as you speak it." Bankei listened to this request with gentle attention, his expression remaining calm and compassionate. When the gentleman finished speaking, the master sat quietly for a moment, as if considering not just the question, but the entire situation, the absent seeker, the well-intentioned messenger, and the profound impossibility of what was being asked. Finally, Bankei spoke with characteristic simplicity and directness. "This matter of Zen is difficult to convey even through direct question and answer, between teacher and student meeting face to face. It becomes all the more difficult, indeed impossible, to transmit through a messenger, no matter how sincere or capable that messenger might be." Having delivered this response, the master said nothing more. He simply sat in silence, embodying the very teaching he had just articulated. The gentleman waited, perhaps expecting elaboration or alternative suggestions, but none came. Eventually, finding himself speechless and somewhat confused, the gentleman bowed politely and withdrew from the temple. The Buddha once said, "Be a lamp unto yourself." This profound truth reveals itself in Bankei's gentle but firm refusal to reduce Zen wisdom to a message that could be carried by proxy. Spiritual awakening cannot be transmitted second-hand because it is not information, but transformation. Why do we often approach spiritual learning as if it were academic knowledge that can be collected and conveyed through intermediaries? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is not a concept to be understood, but a reality to be directly experienced. Like the taste of water to someone who is thirsty, it cannot be adequately described. It must be experienced firsthand. The Baron's question about the nature of consciousness reveals our typical approach to spiritual inquiry. We want to understand awareness intellectually, to grasp it conceptually, to possess it as knowledge. But consciousness cannot be made into an object of study because it is the very subject doing the studying. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The seeing itself is what you are trying to see. Consider how often throughout your day you might approach spiritual wisdom as information to be collected, rather than truth to be embodied. We read books about meditation instead of meditating. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of investigating our present experience. We seek answers about the nature of mind instead of directly examining what we call mind right now. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This paradox points to the heart of why spiritual transmission requires direct engagement. The self that wants to understand Buddhism intellectually is the very construction that must be seen through. This seeing through happens not through accumulating knowledge, but through intimate investigation of immediate experience. The messenger in the story represents our own tendency to approach awakening indirectly. We want to understand consciousness from a safe distance, maintaining the illusion that we are separate observers studying an object called awareness. But awareness is what we are, not what we have. It cannot be possessed, understood, or transmitted because we are expressions of it. Bankei's silence after his brief explanation was itself a teaching. In Zen, silence often conveys what words cannot. The gaps between thoughts, the space between breaths, the awareness in which all experiences arise. These cannot be captured in language, but can be directly recognized when we stop trying to grasp them conceptually. This doesn't mean spiritual teaching is impossible or that teachers serve no purpose. Rather, it means that authentic teaching points students toward their own direct experience, rather than providing second-hand descriptions of someone else's realization. The teacher's role is not to deliver enlightenment, but to create conditions where students might recognize what they already are. Tonight, as you experience the simple fact of being conscious, aware of these words, aware of your body, aware of the space in which thoughts and sensations appear, can you investigate this awareness directly rather than through concepts? Can you be present to your experience rather than trying to understand it through someone else's descriptions? As the Buddha taught, work out your own salvation with diligence. The path to freedom cannot be walked by proxy. It requires your own feet, your own breath, your own willingness to look directly at what you have always been but perhaps never clearly seen. Tonight, as we draw our time together to a peaceful conclusion, do you notice how the tranquility you've discovered feels less like something you've acquired and more like something you've remembered? Can you sense that the deep calm you've encountered tonight doesn't belong to these tales alone, but exists as a constant presence within your own being, patiently waiting for your attention? The Buddha reminded us that better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace. In the spirit of this wisdom, recognize that serenity and understanding don't require perfect conditions or extraordinary experiences, but flourish naturally from your own inner landscape, available in each breathing moment. Through tonight's exploration, every narrative has woven together a timeless understanding, consistently revealing the liberating truth that struggle diminishes when we loosen our hold. That genuine freedom flows effortlessly when we let go of our need to control, and that lasting contentment springs from perceiving reality clearly, beyond our habitual patterns and automatic responses. Even when your thoughts wander, Even when tension creeps back in, the insights you've gathered tonight have taken root in the depths of your being, ready to nourish you whenever you call upon them. Reflect, as you settle into rest, that these enduring teachings have revealed not some far-off destination, but a way of living with complete presence in this very moment. In the stillness that surrounds you now, notice how profoundly your perspective has expanded, how effortlessly your breathing has deepened, and how peacefully your mind settles, undisturbed and receptive. These lessons remind us that authentic understanding isn't concealed in remote monasteries or buried within ancient manuscripts. It radiates clearly and unmistakably through the beautiful simplicity of conscious presence. Tonight, you've touched that reality, a reality that emerges naturally when we simply stop and truly listen. As you transition from this serene space back into the rhythm of everyday life, take with you not merely the stories you've heard, but the deep stillness and clarity they've awakened in you. May this tranquility remain your faithful companion, guiding you through moments of joy and periods of difficulty with equal grace. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.